Imagine for a moment you are standing on the vast, desolate Wyoming plains, deep in the unforgiving grip of January 1872. Overhead, the sky stretches like an endless, bleached canvas, indistinguishable from the frozen earth beneath, a pale, oppressive sheet binding you between heaven and a harsh reality. For 3 relentless days, the snow has fallen, initially soft and whispering, but now it's a stinging, horizontal assault, driven by winds that howl from some unseen, forgotten edge of the world. You're isolated out here, miles and miles from the closest whisper of civilization. A solitary figure dwarfed by an indifferent landscape. Your shelter, a humble collection of roughly hewn logs, barely qualifies as a cabin, its walls hastily chinked with whatever mud, moss, and desperate scraps you managed to cram into the cracks before the ground surrendered to an iron-hard freeze. Tonight, like every other soul-crushingly cold winter night in this wilderness, your only purpose, your singular obsession, is deceptively simple: to find sleep, to grant your aching body a brief reprieve, to somehow wake again when the first meager light of dawn dares to penetrate the gaps in your walls. Yet, you know deep down, sleep in this place, at this time, is never, ever simple. The rhythm of your days on this untamed frontier is brutally dictated by the sun, a relentless, consistent cycle that offers no quarter. You stir before the first sliver of dawn touches the horizon, because there is truly no other option. The vital fire, your hearth and your heart, has dwindled to a handful of sullen embers during the long, dark hours. If you don't coax it back to roaring life soon, you know the insidious cold will seep into your very bones, a creeping paralysis that makes even the smallest movement a painful, grinding effort. Your breath hangs visible in the frigid air, each exhale a fragile cloud in the single room you call home. Frost has painted delicate, intricate patterns across the inside surfaces of your log walls, transforming the rough wood into a gallery of winter's icy art, a beautiful but terrifying reminder of the battle you're constantly fighting. Your leather boots, left by the hearth with the best of intentions, are stiff, rigid with cold, despite your desperate attempts to keep them pliable. You simply cannot force your feet into them. The frozen leather would invite immediate, agonizing frostbite. So, you wait. You crouch, hunched by the struggling fire, patiently feeding it, kindling one small, precious piece of wood at a time. Firewood, you see, is a treasure out here, and your dwindling supply is a constant source of quiet dread. This is your dawn ritual. This is the memory you carry with you, a heavy stone, through all your waking hours, the certainty that tonight you will have to do it all over again, that before you can finally rest, you must meticulously prepare, that sleep itself, the most basic human need, has become an arduous, demanding chore. Let's really step into what it means to seek that elusive rest in the frozen heart of the Wild West winter. Your cabin, this meager refuge, sits on a small claim, perhaps in the vast stretches of Montana territory, though it could just as easily be Dakota or Wyoming or the high, wind-swept country of Colorado. The walls are logs, yes, but they were felled and hastily erected during the brief, frantic building season, and they've settled unevenly over time, betraying the hasty workmanship. Gaps gape between them, some wide enough to slip your finger through, and despite your endless efforts to pack them with mud, moss, tattered rags, even pages torn from the few precious books you possess, the biting wind still finds its way inside. At night, lying on your narrow bed, you can vividly feel that draft, a chilling phantom moving across your face like cold fingers exploring in the absolute darkness. Above you, the roof is a precarious layering of sod laid over rough-hewn planking. When the rains or snows come, the sod becomes impossibly heavy, soaking up the moisture. Sometimes you wake to the unwelcome, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water in the corners, a sound that gnaws at your resolve. Other times, in the dead of night, small, frozen chunks of earth will detach, thudding onto your worn quilt, startling you awake. In the very deepest, most brutal cold, the entire roof freezes into a solid, unyielding mass. That should be a good thing, right? A solid roof. But isn't that just like life out here? Instead, any precious warmth from your struggling fire rises, just enough to melt the underside of that frozen sod, creating a perpetual, soul-sapping state of dampness, hanging heavy directly over your head. You have one window, a solitary aperture in the rough wall. It has no glass, of course. Glass is an unimaginable luxury, too expensive and impossibly far away. So, you've meticulously covered the opening with oiled paper, stretched tautly over a simple wooden frame. During the day, it filters in a pale, watery light, barely illuminating the gloom. At night, however, it becomes just another vulnerable point, an open invitation for the brutal cold to seep in. To combat this, you've hung a scrap of canvas over it, a forlorn extra layer between your precarious existence and the killing cold that howls relentlessly outside. Your bed, well, it's certainly not what anyone from those soft eastern cities would even recognize as a bed. It's a rudimentary wooden frame, sturdy ropes strung across it in a crude grid pattern. On top of that, a thin mattress stuffed with prairie grass and straw you painstakingly gathered yourself last summer, back when the world was warm and this freezing future seemed a distant, manageable problem. Now, lying on it night after night, you feel every single stem, every unyielding stalk digging into your weary body. The straw, compressed under your weight over countless nights, offers far less cushioning than you'd desperately hoped for. And beneath it all, beneath the ropes, beneath the frame, is the floor, rough, unsealed planks with gaps between them, through which the unyielding, frozen earth below seems to breathe its icy essence upward. Some nights, you could swear you feel the cold rising through the floorboards with even greater intensity than it descends from the damp, freezing ceiling. Your blankets, thick and undeniably heavy, are made of wool, a blessing and a curse. They're scratchy against your skin and almost perpetually damp. Wool, to its credit, possesses that miraculous property of keeping you warm even when it's wet, which is fortunate because moisture is your constant, uninvited companion in this cabin. Your very breath, visible in the frigid air, condenses on the wool, settling onto the blankets in a fine mist that by morning has frozen into countless tiny, glistening crystals. When you finally stir from your fitful sleep, the edges of your coverings are stiff, rigid with frost, an icy armor that must be broken just to move. You still have that massive buffalo robe, don't you? You traded for it a couple of winters ago, and it's a beast heavy as sin, carrying the earthy tang of old animal, wood smoke, and the potent chemicals that kept it from rotting away. But, my friend, it holds heat like no other treasure in this desolate landscape. On the most merciless nights, you gather every shred of warmth you possess, piling woolen blankets, the great hide, your spare clothes, even your worn coat, on top of your shivering form. Still, you feel the cold's insidious tendrils probing, seeking a way in. Sleep, you've discovered isn't about finding comfort, but simply succumbing to sheer exhaustion. The intricate dance of preparing for rest begins long before you ever consider lying down. As the afternoon light starts its rapid retreat hand in winter, it simply gives up, the sun surrendering its valiant fight against the biting air. By 4 o'clock, begin the careful, almost sacred ritual of rationing your precious firewood. There's a pile, yes, tucked under the rough lean-to you constructed against the cabin wall, but it's a cruel joke. It's never, ever enough. Why is that, you ask? Because the trees out here are sparse, mere whispers on the horizon, and whatever wood you manage to hack down is often green, stubbornly damp, or heavy with frost. Good, dry fuel, the kind that burns with true warmth, demands foresight, a luxury you simply couldn't afford during the fleeting summer months. Summer was a blur of frantic energy, a desperate sprint to coax food from the unyielding soil, mend the countless cracks in your fragile home, and accomplish the 100 other back-breaking tasks survival relentlessly demands. So, you feed the fire with a miser's hand, each log placed with a sigh and a prayer, just enough to keep the raw edge of the chill from cutting too deep, just enough to bring a weak broth-dried beans, perhaps a sliver of salt pork, if fortune smiles, all simmered in water, melted from snow to a comforting warmth for supper. You eat slowly, letting the firelight dance on your face, savoring the fleeting heat while the cold continues its quiet assault on your back. This cabin, you know, is far too small, too poorly sealed, to ever know true, even warmth. There are zones, the small, precious circle of warmth near the hearth, and then everywhere else. After your meager meal, you move through a series of small, practiced tasks that have solidified into an unshakable ritual. First, you check the heavy timber door, testing its sturdy latch, ensuring it's sealed as best it can be against the relentless wind and any creature drawn by the faint scent of food or the whisper of warmth. You've heard them, haven't you? Wolves, their distant, mournful howls, sliding through the darkness, most nights like cold, liquid dread. Then you attend to your boots, positioning them just so near the glowing embers, a silent plea for them to shed their icy grip. You lay out tomorrow's clothes, such as they are, hoping the fire's lingering heat might just take the edge off their inevitable frigidity come morning. Finally, with a sigh that feels as old as the hills, you add what will likely be the last log to the dying flames until dawn. You've mastered the subtle art of banking a fire, a skill learned through countless cold, unforgiving nights. You gently cover the glowing coals with a fine layer of ash, a slow, deliberate smothering that starves them of oxygen just enough to make them smolder, to hold their life breath without consuming themselves entirely. It truly is an art, isn't it? Sometimes you get it just right, waking to a soft orange glow that you can coax back to a leaping flame. Other times you misjudge, and dawn greets you with only a dead, gray silence, a stark prelude to the much harder task of starting from nothing. And then there's truly nothing left to do but surrender to the night. As you approach your bed, you can already feel the profound chill that awaits you. The blankets, poor things, have been absorbing the cabin's ambient cold all day, which means they are, in no uncertain terms, frigid, not quite frozen stiff, but cold enough that sliding between them feels like an unwelcome plunge into icy water, a shock to your entire body. Some more experienced settlers, you've heard, have learned to heat stones in the fire, Wrap them carefully in cloth and place them under the covers to warm the bed. You've even tried this yourself, haven't you? The stones, let's be honest, offer a glorious, fleeting hour of warmth, a brief respite from the biting chill. Then, inevitably, they transform into cumbersome, heavy rocks, slowly cooling, taking up valuable space beneath your blankets. Still, sometimes, you go through the motions anyway. That initial hour of blessed warmth, that brief illusion of comfort, is often worth the later awkwardness, isn't it? You certainly don't undress for bed. The very thought of shedding a single layer in this relentless cold is utterly absurd. No, you sleep in your scratchy wool shirt, your thick, long underwear, your durable socks. On the most brutal nights, you might even keep your trousers on, a desperate extra layer. You've even slept with your coat spread over you like an additional blanket, your hat pulled low over your ears, muffling the world. Modesty, comfort, those, my friend, are luxuries reserved for people who possess heat to spare, a distant memory from another life. You lie down, and the cold from the straw mattress instantly seeps through your multiple layers of clothing, a creeping numbness. You pull the blankets up, piling them high, drawing them close, and then you do what everyone does, what is instinctual. You curl into yourself, knees drawn tight to your chest, hands tucked under your arms or nestled between your thighs. You make yourself as small, as compact as possible, a desperate attempt to conserve your dwindling body heat. Your breath, a small, visible cloud, frosts in the frigid air above your face, and you pull the blankets even higher until only your nose and eyes are exposed to the vast, cold darkness. This, you realize, is the position you will maintain, more or less, for the next 8 to 10 hours of the long, arduous night. The sounds of a winter night on the frontier are a symphony all their own, a harsh, particular music. The wind, for instance, is a constant presence, an endless lament that rises and falls, never quite ceasing. It's a master of detection, finding every tiny gap in your cabin walls, every forgotten weakness in its structure, and then it whistles through, a chorus ranging from a soft, sibilant whisper to a sharp, unsettling shriek. Even the cabin itself has a voice, its timbers contracting in the bitter cold with sharp cracks and deep groans that still make you jump, even though you've heard them 100 times. Sometimes, a soft, heavy thud alerts you as a slab of snow slides off the roof, mimicking the sound of imminent collapse, making your heart leap. And then, of course, there are the animal sounds. The wolves, yes, their chilling song echoing across the frozen plains. But also the coyotes, often too close for comfort. The rare, blood-curdling scream of a mountain lion, unmistakable in its raw terror. And finally, the nervous skittering of mice within your walls, seeking the same meager warmth you are. You've made a kind of peace with them, haven't you? They're just trying to survive, too. Sleep, you've learned, does not come easily here. Your body is utterly spent, exhausted by the relentless, demanding labor of frontier life. Yet your mind stubbornly resists. There's a low, persistent hum of anxiety that accompanies every single winter night, a stark awareness of your profound vulnerability. The fire could die, plunging the cabin into an even deeper, more dangerous cold. The temperature could plummet further, reaching lethal depths. A sudden, savage storm could blow in, trapping you inside for days, perhaps weeks. These unsettling thoughts circle and prowl in the darkness of your mind, much like the wolves outside, and you have to breathe through them, slow and steady, willing your restless mind to find a semblance of calm, to finally will asterisk yourself into the embrace of unconsciousness. And now you find yourself settling into a semblance of rest. Sometimes this quiet space you inhabit isn't entirely your own, is it? If you're part of a family, you might hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of your children tucked into various nooks, or perhaps sharing a straw-filled pallet on the floor beside you. Married couples naturally huddle closer, their combined body heat a small, precious defiance against the encroaching chill. But picture, if you will, the clamor of a mining camp bunkhouse or a cattle town shelter during the brutal winter months. Men packed in, shoulder to shoulder, on narrow wooden bunks, stacked 2 or even 3 high. Here, the very concept of privacy simply dissolves, lost to the shared struggle. The symphony of snores, the occasional cough, the rustle of someone shifting in the night, it all blends into its own strange human lullaby. Odd, isn't it? Yet, it's a constant, visceral reminder that even in the vast wilderness, you are not utterly alone in the dark. But then, there are those whose solitude bites deepest. Imagine a lone cowboy out on the vast, stretching prairie, the stars overhead so sharp and numerous they seem almost within reach. His horse, a silent companion, is tethered nearby, its breath a faint mist in the frigid air. He's laid his bedroll directly onto the frozen ground, having just finished his meager meal of beans cooked over a tiny, flickering fire. Now, fully clothed, he pulls his coarse wool blanket and oilskin slicker tight, his saddle serving as a lumpy, unyielding pillow. The earth beneath him is a thief, relentlessly pulling warmth from his very bones, a cold that sinks deep into his core. Sleep for him is a fractured thing, a fitful doze, punctuated by restless awakenings. Every hour or so, he stirs, compelled to check his dwindling fire, to listen for the faint snap of a twig or the distant howl of a coyote, anything that signals a threat, or simply to confirm, in the bone-chilling silence, that he is still, against all odds, alive. Ah, the frontier sleeper, you see, learns harsh truths that folk in warmer, safer climes will thankfully never know. Sleep isn't so much a gentle respite as it is a temporary, grudging surrender. Your body, utterly exhausted, demands it, and so you comply. But that keen edge of alertness, it never quite dulls. A part of you, a primal sentinel, remains ever vigilant, listening for the whisper of danger, for the subtle shift in the night air. And let's be honest, the dangers are terrifyingly real. A careless night can mean waking to frost-bitten fingers, toes, or even your nose, rendered numb and lifeless. The insidious threat of carbon monoxide from a poorly ventilated fire can silently claim an entire cabin of slumbering souls before the first hint of dawn. And then there's hypothermia, that cruel deceiver, lulling you into a profound, irresistible drowsiness, even as it saps the very life from you. The line between sleep and death, you realize, with a chilling certainty, becomes impossibly, terrifyingly thin when the mercury plummets. You've likely heard the whispered tales, haven't you? Stories of travelers discovered in the spring thaw, curled in their blankets, as if merely sleeping peacefully, yet frozen solid, their features serene in death. So, even in that blurry half-consciousness, you learn to monitor yourself with an almost clinical detachment. Are your feet numb? Can you still feel the individual tips of your fingers? And that unsettling confusion, that strange urge to shed your blankets and clothes in the middle of a freezing night. That's the most ominous sign of all, a desperate, internal alarm bell, screaming for you to move, to wake up, to do something asterisk immediately. The winter nights stretch out interminably, don't they? The sun, a fleeting visitor, dips below the horizon early and delays its return until late morning, leaving you with 15 or 16 hours of oppressive darkness. Staying awake for all of it is an impossibility. Candles and precious lamp oil are far too valuable to squander for mere light. And besides, what is there to do in the profound darkness anyway, save for sleep? So, you learn to sleep in disjointed fragments, sometimes even in shifts. You might doze for a while, the warmth seeping away as the fire dies down, only to jolt awake, stoke the embers back to life, and then try to drift off again. It's a broken, unsatisfying rhythm, far from truly restful, but it's just enough, isn't it? It's enough to carry you through. Some nights, of course, are a special kind of hell. When a true blizzard descends, the wind doesn't just blow. It screams, a banshee wail that rattles the very timbers of your cabin. You can feel the structure groan and shudder under the onslaught, and outside, snow piles against your door, higher and higher, a solid white barricade that you couldn't hope to breach. On those nights, you simply endure. You tend the fire as best you can, conserving every precious ember, and you burrow deeper under your layers of blankets. You wait. There is absolutely nothing else to do. The world outside becomes a hostile, abstract force, not malicious, perhaps, but profoundly indifferent. And that indifference, you understand with a primal dread, could extinguish your life as easily as you draw a breath. But here's the truly strange, almost miraculous thing. You do sleep. Despite the bone-deep cold, despite the grinding discomfort, despite the ever-present gnawing fear, your body eventually, inevitably, surrenders. The sheer force of exhaustion is a powerful master. After trudging through knee-deep snow all day, after the brutal chore of chopping frozen wood, after wrestling with tools so cold they cling to your skin, after 1,000 small, unending battles that define a winter day on the frontier, your body simply demands rest, and so you give it, however imperfectly, however reluctantly, and when you finally, mercifully, drift off somewhere in those desolate hours before dawn, there's a fleeting moment, just a sliver of time, when the discomfort recedes. It's when your body's precious warmth, carefully trapped beneath layers of wool and hides, finally reaches a kind of fragile equilibrium with the biting cold. It's when the ceaseless sounds of the night, the wind, the creaking of logs become an ambient hum, almost soothing in their relentless consistency. It's when you finally sink into something that, for a few precious minutes, approximates real, true sleep. Your dreams, when they do come, are almost always vivid tapestries of warmth. You might dream of summer's golden embrace, of places you left behind where houses boasted sturdy walls and real windows, where stoves radiated heat into every corner. Sometimes, the hunger of months past surfaces in dreams of lavish meals you haven't tasted in an age. And often, you dream of people, the beloved faces you miss, the cherished voices you'd almost forgotten, their echoes lingering in the quiet corners of your mind. Then, always too soon, you surface. The fire, if you were lucky enough to fall into a deeper sleep, is now low or completely dead. The cabin is even colder than when you first drifted off, a silent, frigid box. Your body aches from lying in one rigid position, from the poor support of your makeshift mattress, from the cumulative, relentless cold that has seeped into your joints and muscles. But you're alive. You made it through another night. With a grunt, you push back the stiff, heavy blankets, the coarse wool rasping against your skin. You sit up, a plume of your own breath fogging in the frigid air, momentarily hanging like a ghost before dissipating. Your gaze falls to your boots, stiff and cold despite their proximity to the long-dead hearth. You reach for them, a small, weary sigh escaping your lips, and you begin again. This, you see, is the unyielding rhythm of winter sleep on the frontier. It's not restful, certainly not comfortable, but it is miraculously sufficient. It is enough to keep you going, enough to let you see another day dawning, even if it brings only more cold. The settlers, the hardy miners, the tough cowboys, the tenacious farmers, they all learned to sleep in the cold. They learned because they had no other choice. For them, sleep was not a luxury. It was raw, uncompromising survival. And survival, above all else, was all that truly mattered. And so, they slept poorly, uncomfortably, anxiously, but they slept night after night, winter after long winter, until spring finally, mercifully, arrived, and the world remembered the blessed warmth again. As the fire in our imagined cabin burns lower still, let us shift our attention from this common, shared struggle to one particular man, a figure who became legend, not asterisk, despite asterisk the unforgiving cold, but precisely asterisk because asterisk of how he endured it. His name was Hugh Glass, and his extraordinary story is woven through with winter nights so brutal, so utterly impossible, they beggar belief. Yet, every single word of it is firmly grounded in the historical record. Now, picture him, a man sleeping utterly alone under a vast, inky canvas of stars, a sky so cold they seem to crackle and splinter in the profound darkness. Imagine the sheer, raw determination of it, the very hide of the beast that tried to rip you apart, now your only shield against the merciless wind. You're dragging yourself, inch by agonizing inch, across hundreds of miles of frozen, unforgiving wilderness, every single wound a screaming testament to a fight you should have lost. Picture yourself closing your eyes each night, the blackness pressing in, utterly unsure if the sun would ever touch your face again, yet still you wake, again and again, driven by a force far more obstinate than mere hope. This isn't some grand epic of battlefield heroics, you see. It's something far quieter, far more primal. It's a story about the impossible luxury of stolen rest, about your body's relentless, almost defiant need to shut down, to sleep, even when doing so feels like an ultimate surrender to the inevitable. Hugh Glass, born sometime around 1783 in Pennsylvania, emerges from the shadowy mists of history, his early life as blurred and uncertain as the edges of a fading map. Isn't that just like so many of these frontier legends? What we do know, however, is that his existence was already a tumultuous dance with danger and constant movement, long before fate etched his name into legend. He spent time at sea, for instance, perhaps even forcibly recruited onto a pirate ship. The specific records are frustratingly vague, a common affliction for men who lived their lives on the outermost fringes of established society, adrift from official ledgers. Later, a profound shift occurred. He was captured by the Pawnee people. For several years he lived among them, breathing their air, learning their intricate ways, their nuanced language, and their profound methods of survival in a landscape that would claim unprepared souls with a casual, almost indifferent regularity. Can you imagine the shift in perspective, the sheer depth of knowledge absorbed? By 1823, you'd find Glass settled, for a time anyway, into the demanding life of a fur trapper and guide. He joined Major Andrew Henry's expedition, pushing upstream along the vast Missouri River, heading deep into what we now call South Dakota and Montana. He was roughly 40 years old then, which, by the brutal metrics of the frontier, made him practically an elder statesman. Most trappers were young, impulsive, driven by an almost reckless hunger for fortune, and frankly, quite expendable. But Glass. He possessed a quiet strength the young men utterly lacked, hard-won experience. He knew how to interpret the subtle whispers of the weather, how to scent out fresh water in a parched landscape, how to sleep with a lightness that barely registered, yet wake in an instant, rifle clutched, when the faintest whisper of danger approached. These fur-trapping expeditions, you must understand, were not leisurely strolls. They were exercises in a kind of controlled desperation, men pushing deeper and deeper into uncharted territories, their eyes set on the beaver pelts so prized for fashionable hats across the oceans in Europe. They traveled light, carrying only the barest essentials, depending entirely on their wits, their rifles, and their foraging skills to sustain themselves. When winter finally descended, a bone-chilling shroud across the land, they'd establish crude temporary camps, hasty affairs of stacked logs and stretched hides. There you'd huddle, shivering, around a perpetually hungry fire that never quite managed to push back the profound cold that seeped into your bones. Glass knew this life intimately. He'd spent countless winters in shelters that barely qualified as such. Lean-tos cobbled together from branches and buffalo hide, or simply hollowed-out spaces beneath fallen giants of trees, where you'd press your body against the trunk and pile snow around the opening, desperately trying to trap the meager heat your body produced. He'd spent nights feeding fires throughout the long, dark hours, waking every hour or two from a fitful doze to add more wood, knowing that letting the flames die could mean never waking at all. His sleeping arrangements during these expeditions were utilitarian, almost brutally so. If you were lucky, a buffalo robe would be spread on the frozen ground, a single blanket, perhaps wool or hide, depending on what you'd managed to trade for or carry. Your rifle, always asterisk, within arm's reach, because wolves, bears, or hostile bands could materialize from the inky blackness at any moment. Sometimes you dig a shallow depression in the earth, just deep enough for your body, the slight hollow offering a few inches of precious protection from the relentless wind. Other times, you'd press yourself against your horse, the animal's large, warm body, a more reliable source of heat than any flickering fire. The men who traveled with him slept the same way. You understand? They'd cluster their bedrolls near the fire, a rough, comforting circle, feet pointed towards the flickering warmth, each man responsible for his own survival, yet drawing a subtle, unspoken reassurance from the proximity of others. The sounds of men sleeping in the deep wilderness are particular, aren't they? Beyond the predictable snoring, you'd hear the constant shifting, the periodic, almost unconscious waking to survey the surroundings, the hushed, whispered conversations between those who simply couldn't quite achieve true rest. Sleep on the frontier, you quickly learned, was never private, never fully peaceful, always on edge. And then, in August of 1823, Hugh Glass found himself scouting ahead of his group near the forks of the Grand River in what is now South Dakota. It wasn't yet winter, no, but in these territories, the cold could descend with a sudden, cruel bite at any time. You're moving quietly through a dense thicket of brush, a stream gurgling nearby, when suddenly, a shadow, a grizzly bear, you realize, her cubs, close by, the absolute worst possible encounter. She attacked with a primal, terrifying ferocity that only a mother protecting her young can summon. The sheer violence of it is almost unimaginable. What transpired next has been painstakingly recounted by those who later found him. Patched together from Glass's own harrowing recollections, the bear savaged him, tearing at his scalp, laying open his throat, shattering his ribs, mangling one leg. These were catastrophic injuries, the kind that should have claimed his life in mere minutes. When his terrified companions finally reached the scene, they drove the monstrous bear away, only to stare in horrified silence at what they were certain was a dying man. Major Henry, the expedition's leader, asked for volunteers to remain with Glass until he breathed his last, and then to properly bury him. 2 men stepped forward, John Fitzgerald and a young Jim Bridger, who would, of course, later carve his own legendary path across the West. The grim agreement was an extra payment for this solemn duty. The rest of the party, with heavy hearts and a sense of urgency, moved on. Fitzgerald and Bridger waited. 1 day, 2 days. Glass, defying all logic and expectation, clung to life with a tenacity that must have seemed utterly unnatural, even disturbing. But the territory was treacherous. The looming threat of an attack by Arikara warriors was a very real, very present danger. The 2 men, whether out of fear or simple expedience, eventually made a decision. They took Glass's rifle, his knife, his essential equipment, every vital item, and they left him. Not buried, mind you, not dead, just ... left, abandoned. When Glass finally clawed his way back to enough consciousness to comprehend his horrific situation, he was utterly alone in the vast, indifferent wilderness, unarmed, unable to walk, his wounds weeping and bleeding, certain to fester and infect, and the air, you remember, was growing colder. This, my friend, is where his story truly becomes a story about sleep. You see, since he couldn't walk, he began to crawl. The nearest outpost, Fort Kiowa, lay over 200 miles away. He started dragging himself south, following the Cheyenne River. His progress, at first, was measured in mere yards per day. The pain, you can only imagine, must have been extraordinary, a ceaseless agony, yet pain, when constant enough, eventually becomes just another condition of your miserable existence. But every single night, he had to sleep. Just think about that for a moment. You drag your broken body across the endless, wind-swept prairie, each movement a fresh agony as torn flesh pulls and bones grate with a sickening protest. Just imagine that grinding internal sound, the sheer weight of pain. As dusk paints the sky in bruised purples and grays, a chilling question gnaws at you. Where will you find refuge? You possess nothing, no trusty rifle, no spark for a fire, no shelter from the encroaching night, and you know, deep in your gut, what follows the rich, coppery scent of blood. Your blood. It's on your tattered clothes, seeping from your raw wounds, a crimson trail whispering your presence to every lurking predator. You push forward, desperate, until your failing limbs give out, collapsing into the scant protection of a scrubby bush, a shallow dip in the earth, or sometimes just the open, indifferent ground. In this desperate state, you do what any creature fighting for its life would. You improvise. Your eyes scan the landscape, settling on a macabre solution, the massive, lifeless form of the grizzly that had so nearly claimed your life. Your former companions had dispatched it, leaving its hulking carcass behind. Now, with trembling, pain-racked hands, you begin to hack away at its thick hide. The fur, still warm in places from its recent life, becomes your only defense against the sharpening bite of the evening air. It's your blanket, your makeshift shelter, your sole barrier against the unforgiving elements. You wrap yourself tightly, the rough hair prickling against your skin, a grim irony in being shielded by the very beast that almost ended you. Isn't that just like the wilderness? Each night, enveloped in that potent, musky hide, you drift into a state teetering between true sleep and a hazy unconsciousness. Your body screams for deep, restorative rest to knit itself back together. Yet genuine slumber is a cruel mirage. The cold gnaws at your extremities, a constant, pervasive chill. The pain, an ever-present companion, throbs relentlessly. But perhaps worse than both is the profound, suffocating vulnerability. You cannot flee, you cannot fight. You can only lie utterly still, your senses hyper-alert, praying that nothing, no wandering wolf, no curious coyote discovers your broken form in the impenetrable darkness. The sheer psychological burden of this existence, day after day, is immense, isn't it? Every closed eye a gamble, every night a potential last. Often, the inky blackness would be pierced by the disquieting sounds of the wilderness. You'd hear them, the sharp, high-pitched yips and mournful howls of coyotes, their unseen forms circling, the soft pad of their paws barely disturbing the prairie floor. You'd lie utterly rigid, a silent lump under the bare hide, holding your breath, willing yourself to be nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle, too formidable, too alive, to risk. Most times, they'd eventually drift away, their calls fading into the distance. But sometimes, they'd draw so near you could distinguish their rank, musky scent, an animalistic tang mingling with the sickening sweetness of your own festering wounds, and the cold, oh, the cold. It intensified with each passing day. Each morning you'd stir, often to a blanket stiff with frost, your teeth chattering uncontrollably as a deep chill radiated from your very bones. Yet you'd wake, always, against every single impossible odd, you'd wake. This simple act, this continuation of consciousness, became a profound victory. Your survival hinged on whatever meager sustenance you could unearth or seize. You'd scour the ground for wild berries, their tartness a fleeting joy, or dig laboriously with bare, aching hands for roots buried beneath the tough earth. One day, you witnessed the raw power of the prairie as a pack of wolves brought down a buffalo calf. After they'd gorged themselves and vanished back into the vastness, you mustered every ounce of strength to drag yourself to the gruesome bounty, tearing at what remained. That buffalo carcass offered more than just sustenance. It was a godsend for improving your meager survival kit. You meticulously cut away strips of its resilient hide, layering them with the bare skin to craft a more substantial, warmer cocoon against the relentless cold. As weeks blurred into an agonizing continuum, an almost imperceptible shift began. Your horrific wounds, against all rational expectation, started to slowly, stubbornly close. With this healing came a small measure of renewed strength. Your laborious crawling transformed into something more purposeful, allowing you to cover slightly more ground with each painful, hard-won day. Yet, the nights remained an unforgiving ordeal. The air grew thinner, sharper. Autumn deepened, each passing day a grim reminder that winter, with its fatal embrace, was rapidly closing in. You were ill-equipped, practically naked to the elements, your body still a battlefield scarred by trauma that should have been your end. Then, a shimmering ribbon appeared on the horizon, the Cheyenne River. You staggered towards it, collapsing at its edge, greedily drinking the icy water that coursed directly from distant mountain snowmelt. It was a frigid shock, chilling you to the very core, but it meant you wouldn't perish from thirst, and that, you knew, was no small mercy. Sometimes, when you dared, you'd sleep close by, the ceaseless murmur of the water in the pitch darkness becoming a strange, soothing companion. There's a particular, profound loneliness that settles when you're utterly alone in such an expansive wilderness of feeling, almost impossible to convey to those who haven't experienced it firsthand. The silence isn't truly silent, of course. You hear the ceaseless whisper of the wind, the rush of the river, the distant calls of creatures. But it's an emptiness of human presence so profound it can make you feel utterly erased, a ghost in an indifferent landscape. You'd lie under your rough hides, your breath misting in the frigid air, gazing upwards at stars so impossibly numerous and brilliant they seemed painted onto the velvet blackness. You, the sole human eye, witnessing that celestial grandeur, the only conscious mind in all that cold, silent void. Some historians wonder if you talked to yourself then, weaving solitary conversations into the darkness as a desperate tether to sanity. Others suggest you might have prayed, though you weren't particularly known for your religious fervor. More likely, you simply endured. Let's be honest. The human spirit possesses an astounding capacity for resilience when the chilling alternative is absolute oblivion. You push past what seems possible, day after brutal day, because the will to live is a primal, unyielding force within you. Then, a monumental shift. As a flicker of strength slowly returned to your ravaged frame, you managed to achieve something truly transformative: fire. You could build small blazes. This singular accomplishment changed everything, altering the very texture of your nights. Fire meant warmth, yes, a glorious, radiating heat against the biting cold. But more than that, it meant protection. You watched, relieved, as animals shied away from the dancing flames, and the psychological comfort of that tiny, defiant light in the vast, devouring darkness. It's impossible to overstate its power, isn't it? You'd meticulously scavenge for dry wood, using flint and steel you'd either fashioned or miraculously found, nursing those precious sparks into small, crackling beacons through the long hours until dawn. With fire, sleep, though never easy, became easier, a small yet profound victory. Your solitary ordeal began to soften around the edges. You started to encounter others, friendly indigenous people who offered you food and essential supplies, their kindness a balm to your weary spirit. Then, a French trading party who astonishingly offered you passage downstream on their sturdy keelboat. Your desperate, ground-crawling existence gradually transformed into a more determined, purposeful trek. You were covering miles now, not mere yards. Yet, even with these newfound comforts and connections, the nights remained relentlessly cold and true. Restorative sleep remained something you had to achieve, not something that simply happened. Finally, after 6 relentless weeks, the crude palisades of Fort Kiowa materialized in the crisp October air. You had arrived. The fort's inhabitants stared, astonishment etched on their faces, for they'd heard the grim tale of the trapper left for dead. And here you were, a walking ghost, barely a man, but undeniably walking into their compound. Your grievous wounds, now angry, puckered scars, mapped your ordeal. Your body was a skeletal frame, utterly emaciated, yet miraculously alive. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, You slept in a real bed, within a room with solid walls and a roof, beneath soft, clean blankets, warmed by the glorious crackle of a proper fireplace. And according to the old accounts, you've witnessed his struggle, the relentless will that defied the icy grasp of death. Now, imagine the profound, unburdening exhale as he finally surrendered to true rest. For nearly 24 hours, Hugh Glass simply slept, a deep, dreamless oblivion that melted away the bone-deep vigilance of those frozen, solitary nights. His body, pushed past every limit, at last found permission to release the tension, the raw ache of survival. But as the warmth seeped back into his bones at Fort Kiowa, a different kind of hunger stirred within him. Survival wasn't enough. He wanted answers. He wanted to confront the men who'd left him for dead. So, you see, Glass was not done with his journey. Through the long winter months, nestled in the relative safety of the fort, you can almost feel the softness of the bed beneath him, smell the comforting scent of wood smoke, taste the regular, nourishing meals. His wounds, both visible and unseen, slowly began to knit themselves back together in ways impossible while dragging himself across a frozen landscape. And then, as spring breathed new life into the plains, he set out once more. Imagine the crisp air on your face as you track across the awakening wilderness, first to Fort Henry, then further to Fort Atkinson, a relentless hunter on the trail of Fitzgerald and young Bridger. When the moment of truth arrived, you might expect a storm of fury, a thirst for brutal vengeance. Yet, when he finally stood before Bridger, Glass chose mercy. Perhaps it was the boy's youth, the clear impression that he'd been an unwilling pawn in Fitzgerald's cruel game. What would you have done? But Fitzgerald himself, the true architect of his betrayal, remained elusive, vanishing like smoke on the wind. Eventually, Glass, with a weariness born of relentless pursuit, simply let the imagined revenge slip from his grasp. He drifted back to the only life he truly knew, the solitary rhythm of trapping, the quiet wisdom of guiding, the constant dance with survival. For another decade, the frontier remained his home, its harsh beauty, his constant companion. He navigated countless close calls, outlasted more brutal winters, and slept rough in conditions that would break most men. Can you hear the whisper of the wind through bare branches? Feel the biting cold that seems to seep into your very marrow. Then, in 1833, near the winding Yellowstone River, the relentless frontier finally claimed him. In a sudden, violent encounter with Arikara warriors, Glass and two companions met their end. He was roughly 50 years old, having remarkably outlasted most men of his grueling profession by a full 20 years. Yet, isn't it just like history to remember him not for how he died, but for how he lived? It's that impossible crawl of 1823, you see, that truly defines Hugh Glass. Not the raw violence he endured, but the quiet, stubborn persistence he embodied, night after solitary night. He chose to rest, even when every fiber of his being screamed to give up. Imagine him, eyes closing against the biting wind, wrapped in a tattered hide beneath a vast, indifferent sky, alone and utterly broken. And then, somehow, waking again to drag himself just a little farther. For Hugh Glass, sleep wasn't a comfort, a gentle escape into peace. No, it was a primal, biological refusal to quit. There's something almost beautiful in that, isn't there? A stark, raw testament to the frontier experience in its purest form. The sheer, unyielding determination to rest, to wake, to simply continue. no matter what horrors the night might bring. As you settle into your own warm, safe bed tonight, far removed from predators and the indifferent cruelty of nature, it's almost impossible to truly grasp the sheer, unrelenting endurance of a man like Glass. But perhaps, as you drift towards your own rest, you can carry with you the image of a man who found sleep in conditions that should have killed him, and yet woke anyway. A man who found a form of rest, even within restlessness, who survived one impossible night after another, until those nights blurred into days, days into years, and his incredible story became legend. The frontier demanded so much, you see, but perhaps its cruelest demand was this, that even amidst unthinkable trauma, constant danger, and a cold that sliced to the bone, the body still required sleep. It still needed those hours of profound vulnerability, of absolute stillness. And somehow, against every imaginable odd, people like Hugh Glass found ways to grant their bodies that essential rest, brief, broken, often insufficient, but always, always just enough, barely enough. As we drift deeper into the soft hum of this winter night, let us turn from the known tales towards the whispers at the edges of mystery. The frontier, you must understand, was a crucible where stark, practical survival collided with ancient, deep-rooted traditions. European settlers, fresh from another world, stumbled upon ways of living they simply couldn't comprehend. And in this collision, the fundamental act of sleep became interwoven with folklore, vivid dreams, and practices that blurred the line between the physical and the spiritual. There are so many unanswered questions about winter sleep in the Wild West, fragments of diaries, tantalizing archaeological finds in abandoned homesteads, stories passed down through generations. All of these hint at a sleep culture far stranger, far more complex than mere exhaustion and thin blankets might ever suggest. So, let's wander through these mysteries together, now, gently, as one might walk through a silent winter landscape where the familiar suddenly takes on a strange, ethereal glow in the moonlight. Consider, for a moment, the teepee. More than just a shelter. It was an engineering marvel, yes, but one steeped in spiritual practice. You see, the Plains tribes, the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and many others had been mastering winter survival in this unforgiving landscape for thousands of years before any European settler ever set foot upon it. They held a profound knowledge that the newcomers desperately needed, yet often they failed to truly learn. And at the heart of much of that wisdom was the teepee, a structure so ingeniously designed for winter that it retains a sense of mystery even today. A properly constructed teepee isn't just a tent, not by a long shot. It's a meticulously engineered environment, a breathable cocoon that works in concert with fire, wind, and temperature in ways that can seem almost magical until you truly understand the elegant physics involved. Imagine the wind howling, but the conical shape of the teepee effortlessly sheds both snow and gusts with remarkable efficiency, preventing the kind of heavy accumulation that could crush a lesser structure. Then, at the very top, those adjustable smoke flaps perform a subtle, clever dance, creating a venturi effect that draws smoke up and out, while simultaneously pulling fresh, clean air in from below. Inside, a second layer of hide, suspended just so, forms an insulating air pocket, deftly directing any lingering cold drafts down and away, out beneath the edges. The very act of constructing a teepee was a testament to generations of accumulated knowledge, an ancestral ballet of skill. The poles themselves, carefully selected from specific trees, were cut at precise times of the year, and treated in ways that made them both flexible enough to bend and strong enough to withstand the harshest blizzards. The hides were tanned using intricate methods that left them not only weather-resistant but also surprisingly breathable, a vital component in temperature regulation. The entire structure, a masterpiece of nomadic design, could be assembled or dismantled in under an hour by a skilled family, a whirlwind of practiced hands and silent understanding. Yet, once properly erected, it could stand firm against winds strong enough to utterly flatten a settler's hastily built log cabin. But here, my friend, is where the true mystery begins to unfold. Indigenous peoples would routinely sleep in these teepees through winter nights when temperatures plunged well below zero, and by nearly every account they slept coffined better, in fact, than the settlers huddled in their drafty log cabins. How did they manage such comfort in such extreme conditions? Archaeological digs at historical teepee sites have begun to reveal some fascinating answers. For example, the positioning of sleeping areas was precise, never directly beneath the smoke hole where colder air might descend, but rather along the curved back wall where the inner liner created the warmest, most protected pocket. Families wouldn't sleep on the frozen ground either. Instead, they rested on raised platforms woven from willow branches, layered with thick buffalo robes, lifting them just enough off the chilling earth. And that central fire, carefully tended throughout the long night, created a surprisingly even distribution of warmth, a heat that the teepee's ingenious conical shape seemed to amplify perfectly. The layering of sleeping materials, you see, followed principles that modern sleeping bag designers would instantly recognize. Buffalo robes, with their incredible density, provided insulation by trapping air while simultaneously wicking away moisture. The willow platforms, the secret, you see, began beneath you. Air circulated there, a crucial buffer against the earth's relentless, prickling cold. No direct contact with frozen ground meant no bone-deep chill seeping into your very core. Accounts whisper of 4, perhaps even 5, distinct layers of hides and plush furs meticulously stacked. This wasn't haphazard piling. It was a precise science, each arranged to trap maximum warmth while shedding unnecessary weight. But wait, it wasn't solely about clever engineering, was it? The wisdom ran deeper. You'd witness intricate sleep rituals unfold, the quiet murmur of songs before bedding down, or the meticulous positioning of your sleeping space, oriented with the cardinal directions. Superstition, perhaps, but one woven tight with practical survival. Head to the west, always, away from the cutting bite of the prevailing winds. Pure common sense. The evening routine itself was a carefully choreographed affair, a ballet against the encroaching darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, the fire would be built up, its crackling warmth pushing back the chill. Stones, smooth and heavy, would be carefully placed within the flames, absorbing the heat until they glowed. These silent sentinels would then be arranged around the sleeping area, radiating a gentle, persistent warmth through the long, shadowed night. Children, bundled tight in softest furs, were given priority, nestled into the warmest spots, their small bodies quickly yielding to sleep. Adults, in turn, would arrange themselves around the perimeter, their very bodies becoming a living windbreak, shielding the young and the elderly from the insidious drafts. And then there were the dream practices. Many plains cultures, you see, imbued winter dreams with enormous spiritual significance. The endless nights, hushed and profound, were perceived as a time when the veil between the physical world and the spirit realm grew thin, almost transparent. People would deliberately prepare themselves, often through fasting and prayer, or by sleeping with sacred objects, medicine bundles, specific smooth stones, or precious feathers placed carefully beneath their heads or nearby. Young men, seeking profound guidance, might even separate themselves from the main camp, braving the elements alone in smaller shelters, or even out on the vast, snow-swept prairie. Why? To court those elusive vision dreams that could steer the course of their entire lives. This solitary quest was especially potent in winter. The environment's unyielding harshness was believed to strip away the superficial, peeling back the layers of everyday existence to reveal deeper, foundational truths. A fascinating question haunts researchers. Were these vivid dreams purely spiritual experiences, or were they also deeply influenced by the stark physical conditions of winter sleep? The pervasive scent of wood smoke, thick in the air of a sealed tipi, the subtle oxygen reduction, or the mild hypoxia from sleeping at altitude in mountain camps, not to mention the nutritional deficiencies that gnawed at them as winter stores dwindled. All of these, let's be honest, could certainly produce altered states of consciousness. Vivid dreams, even mild hallucinations. Missionary journals and trader diaries are peppered with accounts describing native people sharing tales of winter dreams of extraordinary vividness. Dreams where they conversed with animals, traversed vast, impossible distances, or received prophecies that felt utterly real. The Europeans, of course, often dismissed these narratives as primitive superstition, a quaint folly. But modern sleep researchers, reviewing these very same accounts, recognize descriptions that sound strikingly similar to lucid dreaming, sleep paralysis, and those peculiar hypnagogic hallucinations that dance on the edge of sleep. What if the winter sleep culture of the Plains tribes had, over generations, learned to work with the altered consciousness that harsh winter conditions naturally produced? What if their sophisticated dream practices weren't just folklore, but a profound, learned response to environmental factors that European settlers simply endured as miserable, disorienting torment? These dreams weren't merely individual experiences, you see. They were communal knowledge. A powerful dream would be shared with the entire tribe, interpreted by wise elders, and sometimes incredibly acted upon. Dreams guided hunting strategies, whispered warnings of impending danger, and even determined the precise timing of sacred ceremonies. In this remarkable way, sleep became not just a necessity for rest, but a potent form of tribal intelligence gathering, a conduit for accessing knowledge that waking consciousness couldn't possibly reach. We'll never know for certain. That invaluable wisdom, passed down orally through generations, was tragically lost in the violence and relentless disruption of colonization. But the mystery lingers, doesn't it? It's etched into the archaeological record, woven into the surviving stories, and hinted at by the peculiar fact that indigenous peoples often seemed to sleep better in winter conditions that left settlers exhausted, half-mad from perpetual poor rest. The settlers' strange adaptations now, let's turn to them, and the odd, often desperate practices that emerged as they grappled with winters they were utterly unprepared for. In the haunting ruins of sod houses, scattered across the vast plains of Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas, archaeologists have stumbled upon a recurring artifact, a silent testament to struggle. Smooth river stones, often found in clusters of 4 to 6, are consistently positioned near where beds would have once stood. These stones bear undeniable signs of repeated heating, discoloration, sometimes even cracked and scarred from intense thermal stress. We know from diaries that warming stones in the fire and placing them in beds was a common practice. But the real mystery, the human element that truly draws you in, lies in the specifics. Some of these stones have been found carefully wrapped in fragments of cloth that, quite frankly, shouldn't have been there at all. Silk, fine cotton. These were precious, rare materials on the unforgiving frontier, items of luxury. Why wrap a hot stone, a utilitarian tool, in your best, most cherished fabric? Some researchers speculate it was purely for heat retention. The finer the weave, the better the insulation, perhaps. Others suggest it was a form of magical thinking, a desperate attempt to bring something beautiful, something associated with better, softer times, into the brutal, soul-crushing reality of winter sleep. Isn't that just like us, clinging to beauty amidst the grit? There's something profoundly touching about these wrapped stones, isn't there? Imagine a woman, her hands rough and calloused from endless frontier labor, her body aching, carefully wrapping a heated river rock in a silk scarf she brought all the way from Boston or Philadelphia. That scarf might be the last truly nice thing she owns, the final tangible reminder of a gentler life she left behind. And yet she transforms this delicate luxury into a tool for raw survival, a warmth giver. But perhaps it's more than practical. Perhaps the silk against her feet at night, even wrapped around a stone, helped her remember she was once someone who owned silk, someone who lived in a world where such elegant things mattered. Even stranger still, some of these stones have been found with scratched symbols on them, crude crosses, simple circles, sometimes what appear to be initials. Were these merely marks of ownership in communal sleeping spaces, ensuring you grabbed your asterisk stone in the pre-dawn darkness? Or were they prayers, literally carved into the very tools of survival? We may never truly know. The people who painstakingly made these marks left no written explanation, and their descendants often don't retain the stories. One theory suggests these marked stones were indeed passed between family members, each stone assigned to a particular person, identified by touch. But then, why the religious symbols? Why the elaborate patterns sometimes found? There's a ritualistic quality to these carvings that hints at something far beyond beyond mere identification. You start to uncover the truly remarkable. Imagine, if you will, the biting wind whipping across an endless plain, the kind of cold that gnaws at your bones. And then consider this: there are accounts, nestled in dusty journals and faded letters sent back east, of settlers burying themselves in straw for warmth, not simply using a straw mattress, mind you, but actually burrowing deep into colossal piles, much like a fox might curl into its den for a long winter's sleep. This wasn't some quaint European tradition. It was born of sheer desperation, a primal instinct kicking in when you'd arrived too late in the season to build proper shelter, or when an early brutal storm had ripped apart the meager structures you'd managed to throw up against the unforgiving elements. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what lengths you'd go to just to feel a fleeting touch of warmth. Picture a small family in Kansas in the year 1869, a woman's diary, its pages brittle with age, whispers of 2 weeks spent living precisely as the mice do, nestled deep within a massive heap of prairie hay they'd frantically gathered. They had just a small, carefully managed opening carved out for air, Can you almost taste the dust and the sweet, cloying scent of dry hay, and a tiny, flickering fire, tended with an almost religious reverence? She speaks of the strange, swirling dreams that visited them all in that confined space, of how time itself seemed to unravel, leaving them lost between day and night. Her children, bless their innocent hearts, would giggle in the suffocating darkness, convinced it was a grand adventure, while she, their mother, lay silently terrified, battling the twin specters of suffocation or a sudden, devastating fire. Her entries from those 2 harrowing weeks, let's be honest, possess a dreamlike quality themselves. You read her words, and you can practically feel the disorienting weight of the hay, the muffled silence, the strange distortions of an environment designed for animals. She recounts conversations she's no longer sure ever truly happened, describes hearing faint, ethereal music that couldn't possibly have been there in their primitive burrow. At one point, she's utterly convinced that several days have melted away, only to have her husband gently inform her that barely 24 hours have passed. The combination of profound sensory deprivation, the perpetually poor air quality, and that gnawing low-level fear of the unknown seems to have plunged them all into a kind of altered consciousness. Yet they survived. Many didn't, of course, but their silent struggles, sadly, were never etched into a diary for us to find. The real mystery here, isn't it, is where adaptation ends and sheer desperation begins. At what precise moment does a raw, primal survival strategy morph into something entirely new? A unique way of being that's neither purely European nor truly indigenous, but something utterly forged from the crucible of the frontier itself. These settlers, burrowing into straw like groundhogs, weren't following dusty old farming traditions from back home in Europe. They were improvising, reaching for anything that promised another breath, becoming something fundamentally different from what they had been. It's a chilling thought, that transformation. And then there's a phrase that echoes through countless frontier diaries and letters, always appearing in reference to winter, always delivered without explanation, as if the writer simply assumes you'll understand. Death, sleep, nights. But we don't, do we? Not fully. From the harrowing context, you can infer these were nights of such unimaginable cold that the very act of slumber became a roll of the dice. Nights when the mercury plunged so dangerously low that to simply drift off was to flirt with the possibility of never waking again. You can almost feel the ice creeping in, numbing your fingertips, stealing the warmth from your breath. Some of these stark entries suggest that on such nights, families would implement a desperate vigil, taking turns to stay awake. One person would huddle, shivering, watching over the others, listening for the shallow rattle of breath, checking for the telltale white patches of frostbite or the glassy stare of hypothermia. The preparations for these death-sleep nights were elaborate, almost ritualistic. You'd meticulously stuff every single crack in the cabin walls with rags, cloth, even precious scraps of newspaper if you had them, fighting the invisible enemy of the wind. The fire, the beating heart of your existence, would be stoked as high as safely possible, its hungry flames licking at the chimney, casting dancing shadows. Then, every blanket, every quilt, every scrap of spare clothing in the entire household would be piled high, a mountainous defense against the encroaching cold, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp wool, pressing down on the sleeping family. Sometimes, in a desperate bid for shared body heat and dwindling resources, multiple families would squeeze into one small cabin, their breaths misting in the frigid air, the collective warmth a fragile shield. But other accounts hint at something even stranger about these nights. They speak of a peculiar quality to the sleep itself, a profound depth, an almost unbearable heaviness, a chilling sense that those who drifted off were somehow journeying far, far away. A homesteader in Montana, writing in January 1875, recounts his wife on one such death sleep night. She sleeps so deep, he scribbled, his hand perhaps stiff with cold. I must shake her hard to wake her. Her breath is slow, and when she finally stirred, disoriented and confused, she spoke of walking through the warm, sun-drenched summer fields of her childhood in Ohio, convinced she was 8 years old again. It took a long, disquieting time for her to truly return to herself, for the harsh reality of the frozen cabin to anchor her back to the present. You hear that and think, oh, this sounds exactly like hypothermia, and you'd be right. But it also feels like something more, doesn't it? The way extreme cold can dramatically slow human metabolism, creating a state that almost mimics hibernation in a species not built for it. The body, pushed to its absolute breaking point, begins to find these strange, desperate adaptations. There are unnerving accounts of people waking from these death-sleep nights with complete memory blanks, as if those terrifying hours had simply been erased from their minds. Others speak of dreams so incredibly vivid, so palpably real, that they eclipsed their waking lives. Some even described experiencing an entire lifetime within a single night, living through years of imagined experiences while their bodies lay perilously still under mounds of heavy blankets, the cold seeping into their very core. Even medical journals from the scattered frontier doctors occasionally documented cases of individuals who appeared undeniably dead from the cold, only to be miraculously revived after hours of careful warming by a roaring fire. The line between sleep and something far more extreme, something bordering on the profound silence of death itself, became frighteningly, terrifyingly thin during those brutal frontier winters. And the cultural response to this harrowing reality, that stark, almost poetic phrase, death, sleep nights, it was a quiet acknowledgement of the ever-present danger, yes, but also a curious normalization, folding it into the ordinary fabric of winter survival. It's just another Tuesday, right? The phrase traveled in letters back east, often causing understandable alarm among recipients who couldn't possibly grasp the frontier context. Imagine a woman writing to her sister in bustling New York, "We had 3 death sleep nights last week." Her sister's panicked, breathless reply, "Thank God you survived." You can almost feel the shiver of fear in those words. What's fascinating is the frontier woman's subsequent bewilderment. Asterisk, of course, asterisk, they survived. She'd written back, slightly confused. Everyone survived death, sleep nights. It was just winter. This profound disconnect reveals something truly crucial, doesn't it? The frontier wasn't just a place. It was actively forging its own unique culture, its own lexicon, its own unsettling normalization of experiences that would have been utterly extraordinary, even horrifying, anywhere else on Earth. Beyond the family cabins, consider the communal sleeping practices that sprang up, forced by necessity, in the rough-and-tumble mining camps, the burgeoning cattle towns, and the sprawling railroad construction sites. These weren't your traditional, close-knit communities, mind you. These were hastily assembled collections of strangers, often men with little to no prior ties to one another, beyond the shared grind of their labor. And yet, the relentless grip of winter shoved them into an intimacy that would have been utterly unthinkable in any other scenario. You couldn't afford to stand on ceremony when survival depended on shared warmth. Bunkhouses, let's be honest, were designed for raw efficiency, not an ounce of comfort. Picture long, narrow buildings, smelling of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and stale wood smoke, with bunks stacked 2 or even 3 high along the rough-hewn walls. A single, potent stove glowed red in the center, and perhaps 1 or 2 small frost-rimmed windows offered the only glimpse of the frozen world outside. In the fiercest grip of winter, 50 or even more men might cram themselves into a space originally meant for 30, because every single body was a precious source of heat. No one, not a soul, wanted to be relegated to the smaller, colder, outlying buildings where the chill seeped into your very bones. The hierarchy of bunks, you might imagine, was a complex and often contentious matter. Top bunks were undeniably warmer, the rising heat of bodies and stove accumulating there. But they were also a treacherous climb in the dark and dangerous. If you found your spot, perhaps a bottom bunk, easy enough to roll into, but oh, the cold seeped in there, didn't it? Those icy tendrils of air, snaking under the rough-hewn door, finding every exposed patch of skin. Or maybe you were lucky, in a way, and got a middle bunk, the sweet spot for warmth, but often a gamble. You might find yourself pressed against a relentless snorer or someone whose scent, let's just say, lingered a little too long. The newest arrivals always drew the shortest straw, while the grizzled veterans, those who'd weathered seasons past, earned their quieter, slightly warmer corners. This wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a testament to survival, and travelers' accounts from the era speak of it with a peculiar blend of revulsion and awe. The air itself was a thick, oppressive blanket. You inhaled a potent cocktail of unwashed bodies, the damp, heavy scent of wet wool, stale tobacco smoke, and the sharp, acrid tang from the privy bucket tucked in a corner, frozen solid. Of course, the door sealed shut against the relentless winter. Then came the symphony of the night, a chorus of rumbling snores, hacking coughs that rattled the very beams, and the ceaseless creak and shift of restless men, trying in vain to find a comfortable position on their hard pallets. Arguments, sharp and sudden, would often flare up, usually over something as petty as a stolen blanket or a boundary crossed in the tightly packed bunks. Violence, though common in these cramped confines, was rarely drawn out. A quick punch, a brief wrestling match, a blur of flailing limbs and grunts, but it always ended swiftly. Why? Because you couldn't afford a serious injury with the unforgiving winter still stretching out before you. A broken limb, a deep cut, could spell disaster for everyone. There were unspoken rules, a primal understanding that permeated the frigid air. You could grumble, you could squabble, even throw a fist, but you never truly harmed another man. Each person's ability to chop wood, tend traps, or simply walk upright meant another day for the group. But isn't it true that humanity often reveals its most extraordinary facets in the face of adversity? In these grim, close quarters, a strange phenomenon blossomed, a culture of communal sleepwatching. You might not have noticed it at first, but unconsciously, you and your bunkmates would begin to synchronize your very sleep cycles. If a man thrashed, caught in the grip of a nightmare, and cried out, others would stir, their eyes flickering open, waiting in the heavy darkness until his ragged breathing settled once more before drifting back to their own uneasy slumber. Or, if someone's snoring suddenly ceased, always a bad omen in such a place, a nearby hand would instinctively reach out, a gentle, probing shake, to coax them back to a fuller, safer breath. It's a remarkable, almost tender vigilance. There were instances, documented in faded letters and journals, of men consciously agreeing to sleep in shifts. One man would keep the dwindling fire alive, feeding it precious fuel, while the others rested. Then they'd switch. But what's truly captivating are the accounts of this happening without any prior discussion. The group, without a single spoken word, organized itself for mutual survival. Imagine a railroad worker in the desolate stretches of Wyoming, waking in the deep chill of the night. It was as if we were one creature, he later penned, one animal with many eyes, and some of those eyes were always open. Doesn't that just send a shiver down your spine? Anthropologists have a name for it: communal vigilance. You see it in other high-stress survival scenarios, but nowhere is it quite as vividly etched into the historical record as in these frontier winter camps. The real mystery, you see, isn't just it happened, but how much of it was conscious cooperation, and how much was something far more primal, an ancient echo stirring deep within us. Think about it. Our distant ancestors didn't retreat to private bedrooms. They slept in huddled groups around the fire, the vast, predator-filled darkness pressing in from beyond the flickering light. The frontier, in its harsh, unyielding way, inadvertently recreated those very conditions. And perhaps, under that crushing weight of winter, something very old in our human sleep behavior simply reasserted itself, a forgotten instinct resurfacing. The connections forged in these shared sleeping spaces were intricate, layered like the frost on the window panes. Men who, in any normal life, would never have exchanged more than a cursory glance. Different classes, vastly different nationalities, clashing temperaments, found themselves intimately bound. Through the raw, shared vulnerability of sleep, you learned their deepest tells. You knew who snored like a freight train, who wrestled with demons in the dead of night, who muttered half-formed sentences in their slumber, and who wept silently when they thought the world was deaf to their sorrow. Some of these bonds, born of shared hardship, transcended the melting snow. Men who'd endured a grueling winter together would seek each other out years later, trusting each other implicitly in business dealings, standing shoulder to shoulder in disputes. That peculiar intimacy of winter sleep carved relationships that simply ignored the usual social boundaries. And then there were the dreams. Oh, the dreams. The phenomenon of these winter dreams truly deserves a moment of quiet reflection. Across countless diaries, hushed letters, and even a few newspaper snippets, multiple sources recount people experiencing extraordinarily vivid dreams during these long frontier winters. Dreams so startlingly real that you'd wake in the pre-dawn gloom, genuinely confused about whether what you'd just experienced was memory or pure invention. Even more compelling were the instances of shared dreams, where multiple people within the same cramped cabin or bunkhouse would awaken with strikingly similar narratives. Picture this: a schoolteacher in Wyoming in 1878 meticulously recorded a night when she and her 2 young boarding students all dreamed of a woman in white, walking silently across the pristine snow. In the dim light of morning, over lukewarm coffee, they compared their nocturnal visions, growing increasingly disturbed as the details perfectly aligned: the woman's specific hairstyle, the precise direction she was heading, even the faint melody she seemed to be humming. The teacher, an educated woman of reason, tried desperately to dismiss it as mere coincidence, but her trembling hand in the journal betrayed her. She filled pages, proposing and then discarding one rational explanation after another, the unsettling reality clinging to her like the winter chill. Modern sleep science, thankfully, offers us a few intriguing pathways to understanding. that faint, ever-present scent of wood smoke from a poorly ventilated stove. It could have contained traces of carbon monoxide, known to induce hallucinations and shared altered states of consciousness. The harsh reality of malnutrition, so common by late winter, would have significantly lowered serotonin levels, intensifying dream vividness and that profound social isolation. The sheer lack of external stimulation would have made everyone hyper-focused on each other, possibly leading to unconscious suggestion and shared imagery as minds mirrored one another. The very science of shared sleeping spaces suggests mechanisms to people in such close proximity subtly influence each other's sleep stages through ambient sounds and movement. If one person dips into REM sleep and begins to stir or murmur, nearby sleepers might be nudged into their own REM cycle. If everyone is reaching that deep dream state at similar times, after a day spent in close quarters with little external novelty, it's not so impossible that their dreams might, indeed, overlap. But here's another thought, perhaps a more poetic one. What if these dreams served a deeper function? Consider the long, dark, utterly isolated months of winter. What if, in that profound quiet, dreams became a vital source of entertainment, a much-needed escape, a way to simply maintain sanity? People would discuss their dreams with fervent detail, building upon each other's narratives, weaving a shared imaginative life that made the brutal physical reality just a little more bearable. It was a lifeline for the mind. Indeed, some frontier communities actively cultivated traditions around winter dream-telling. In the crisp morning air, over a meager breakfast, people would eagerly share the tales spun in their sleep. The most vivid dreams, the strangest, the most comforting, these would be retold and lovingly elaborated, growing richer with each retelling. By the time the first thaws arrived, these dreams had often transformed into almost mythological stories, binding the community together with shared narratives. Children, especially, looked forward to this dream-telling time. In a world where entertainment was a rare luxury, where books were scarce and expensive, and the same few stories had been recounted endless times, fresh dreams were a wellspring of new narrative. Sometimes, children would embellish their dreams, adding fantastical details to make them more captivating, and the adults, understanding the profound need for wonder, would simply go along with it, because in those moments, the asterisk truth, asterisk of the dream, mattered more than its literal accuracy, abilities to simply endure another sunrise. And while many cultures across history have embraced shared dreaming traditions, there was a particular, almost haunting quality to how this phenomenon took root in those desolate, Wild West winter camps. Can you imagine the sheer, biting emptiness? The dreams themselves, you see, began to mirror that vast, stark landscape, immense, lonely, and profoundly strange. Picture yourself, if you will, under an impossible canopy of stars, your breath freezing in the frigid air as you trudge through snow that stretches on forever. You hear the soft pad of paws, and suddenly there's a wolf, its eyes glinting in the pale moonlight, asterisk speaking asterisk to you in a voice that rumbles in your chest. Or perhaps you stumble upon a hidden cave, carved deep into the ice, where the air shimmers with the warmth of summer and forgotten flowers bloom in vibrant hues. There's a palpable yearning woven into these shared nocturnal journeys, isn't there? A profound hunger for warmth, for abundance, for the comforting embrace of home. Yet, amidst the longing, these dreams also offered glimpses of profound beauty and wonder, transforming the very prairie that was so harsh and unforgiving in waking life into a magical realm of mystery and possibility. Was it merely the mind at play, or a masterful psychological adaptation, a way of surviving, not just physically, but mentally, through endless months of brutal hardship, conjuring beauty to offset the ugly realities of gnawing cold, hunger, and persistent fear? And speaking of mysteries, particularly those crafted by human necessity, archaeological sites continue to whisper their secrets to us, long after the last campfire has faded. Take, for instance, a humble homestead in Montana dating back to the 1870s. Researchers, carefully sifting through the layers of time, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light filtering through forgotten gaps, stumbled upon something truly peculiar. Built right into the cabin wall, they found a sleeping alcove. But this wasn't just any nook. It was too small for an adult to comfortably occupy, yet far too thoughtfully and painstakingly constructed to have been a mere afterthought. It begs the question, doesn't it? What story does such a tiny, secret space hold?